Hi, this is Philip Bynoe, and you're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com.
Hi everyone, John Liebman here. You're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com. Here we are today on location, Pasadena, California, at Los Angeles College of Music with none other than Philip Bynoe. How you doing, Philip?
John, good to be here. Glad to be here.
Great to see you. This is a very cool place. Next time you're in Pasadena, be sure to check it out, Los Angeles College of Music. And you have been on the faculty for quite a while, I think about 15 years or so here. It's great to catch up with you. We will get to that point, but I'd like to start from the beginning. I know you have a very interesting musical background. Your dad played the bass when you were growing up. Your mom played the cello, and I think you picked up both of those at some point or another, and then the electric bass and Steve Vai and all that kind of stuff. But tell me about those early years, those early days, as far back as you can remember. How would you describe your musical upbringing?
Well, my father, as you had mentioned, was a symphony player. My mother was a cellist as well. She didn't play as much once I was born, but while I was in the incubation stage, she played quite a bit. And up until when I started studying,
You didn't get in her way?
No, up until when I started studying, because we shared the cello. That's kind of how that happened. So the story is that I was, like most, my father played upright. I wanted to be like him, and at around 6 or 7. I said, I want to play bass. And he said, well, it's too big for you. Why don't you try the cello? And so I started studying cello and studied that for 2 or 3 years, and always had a fascination with the bass. And once I got tall enough to kind of play his, I started kind of fiddling around with the upright. And then in 6th grade, I said, I want to study bass. And he said, well, instead of playing bass, how about you study guitar? Because he figured you could learn both instruments. So then I studied guitar for 3 or 4 years, but my brother was an electric player, and my father both had, so there was an amp and electric bass in the house. And once I got to be around 12 or 13, actually around 11, kids were starting to have bands. And in my town, I think I may have been the only kid that had a bass and an amp, so I became the bass player in all the bands. And that's kind of how I ended up playing bass more than guitar.
Okay, and you grew up in the Boston area, so you ended up going to Berklee College of Music, which seems like a very natural place to go, I would think, with that kind of upbringing in that kind of environment. Tell me a little bit about your experience in Berklee, and particularly, what were your musical aspirations at the time? Did you have a set gig or a set type of career that you had in mind when you enrolled in Berklee, or what were you looking for at the time?
When I was at Berklee, when I first started, my musical journey in that sense, I just wanted to play music. I wanted to play my instrument. I wasn't even really thinking about, income. I just wanted to play and perform and all that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell me some of your career highlights. And the one that stands out most in most people's minds, I think, is the gig with Steve Vai. So why don't we start there? Tell me how that gig came about, and tell me a little bit about Steve and what it was like working with Steve and traveling and touring and everything that goes along with that gig.
Well, that's the one that put me on the map, as they say. Up until I had gotten that gig, I had been playing locally and with the little bit of stardom people that had around my hometown. But the way I got that the Steve Vai gig was through the drummer Mike Mancini, who was a good friend of mine. We played together in a band in Boston. This guy Rick Berlin, and Mike and I met just doing a jam band, and then I auditioned for the Rick gig and got the gig with Rick, and then Michael and I spent a number of years playing together. And he came out to California to record on the Fire Garden Suite with Steve, and had impressed Steve so much that Steve was saying about his planning on doing this new tour band, and he might need a bass player. And so Mike said, oh, well, I know a guy. And so myself and Brian Beller and maybe 1 or 2 other guys got to come out and audition, and I got lucky and managed to get the gig. From there, I got to go ride on a tour bus, which is the thing that all of us musicians love to do. It's a great way to travel. Touring with Steve is a great privilege, because as an artist and as a human, he's a really good guy. He's not a prima donna. He travels with the band. He's on the bus with us. There's 12 of us on the bus. He's one of the guys on the bus. We eat together. We travel. It's a real kind of a family touring experience. And in that regard, I really feel blessed that I've gotten to do most of my touring with him.
And how about musically? What was that gig like?
It was It was very challenging. I mean, he came from the Frank Zappa school, which is a school that I don't think that I would have gotten into. So working with him was my first real exposure to. I mean, I'd played odd meter with the occasional band in locally, but playing it with him and his vision with music is, he kind of sees the whole thing. Now he's doing orchestra type gigs. So when playing with him, he's really thinking 4 or 5 steps ahead. He's really got a vision with what he wants to do, and it's the idea of helping. He helps to kind of show me ways to make my craft better as a musician. So.
And having your career been put on the map, as you put it, with that gig, that opened the door to lots of other things. Tell us some of the, just a few career highlights that stand out in your mind as special or meaningful or memorable or, something that really means something.
Well, the first one that comes to mind is I have to tell a little backstory. When I was a very young boy, my father and I would, every now and then turn on the Johnny Carson show, and he would talk about the gigs that you ought to get, and he would always say, if you can get on that Carson show, that's a real gig. Come, 100 years later, I ended up in a band with Kevin Eubanks that wasn't on the Tonight Show. We would play jazz in some clubs and do some things all around California and whatnot. And the bass player at the time, he had a family emergency, and I got to play in the Tonight Show band for 3 nights, which was a whole big thing. My father and mother were still alive at the time, so I got to call them, and they got to see me on the chair, as we would talk about it, playing bass in the Tonight Show band. That was a really big one.
Excuse me, who was the bass player at the time that you were filling in for?
Stan Sargent, who's a really great musician. Mm-hmm. Other things that have happened, I've worked with a guy named Dorian Hawley, who was on Michael Jackson's gig for a number of years. I've played with him a number of times. I played with Slash for a few minutes.
Anything worth sharing with that gig?
With the Slash thing?
Yeah.
Well, the Slash thing was right before Velvet Revolver. He was writing some songs for the first Hulk movie, and the drummer from, oh my goodness, Black Crowes? I think Steve first name is Steve. So if anybody out there knows who the drummer, I might be thinking of the wrong guy, but he and Slash were kind of getting together and jamming and creating some things. And a friend of mine who was the tech for Steve at the time, Buddy Blaze, heard they were looking for a bass player, and he put them on to me. And so I got to go and jam with them for 2 or 3 weeks and just recording stuff and making things up. And then the Velvet Revolver thing happened, and that kind of went away. So.
But you enjoyed it while it lasted?
It was a lot of fun.
Okay. Well, how about these days? I mean, you're always involved in something. You've been teaching here at the school, but I know you've gone out quite a bit. What's keeping you busy these days?
Well, as I mentioned to you earlier, we just did 2 years with Steve on the Story of Light tour, and there's a DVD available of that concert if you like. Little plug there. I just played recently with a guy named Frank Gambale. And
a guy named Frank Gambale? They know who Frank Gambale is.
And Mike Shapiro and Renata Neto from Prince's band.
Sure.
And we're talking about doing some shows, some kind of more of a jazz thing than the rock thing that I do with Steve. So for me, it's a great opportunity to kind of stretch those muscles, as they say, and be in a situation with some really top-notch musicians and get to create some jazz. So I've been doing that with those guys.
Great. Tell me about your equipment. What are you using these days?
Well, I have a couple of things here. I'm lucky that Music Man Ernie Bell has endorsed me with their 6-string basses, their bongo basses, which I play quite a bit. They're really strong, really great, and they're lightweight for 6-string basses, which is the next thing that I like. I also have this little thing, which is a Kala ukulele bass. Now, you on looking at the TV might think, wow, I might think it looks like Shaq playing a P bass, but no, this is actually a little big bass.
Those are incredible.
Yeah. When I was on the Story of Light tour, we were on the first American and European leg. I was carrying an upright, big case, the whole big.
That's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, and so expensive to travel with. I had the Kala acoustic ukulele bass, and used that, and it has a great sound. I called the guys at Kala, and they turned me on to this thing, and I was able to use this instead of the upright bass, because its sound is, I'm going to say it's comparable to an upright bass. I've recorded with it and not recorded it as an upright bass, recorded it for what its sound does, but for kind of making it so I can have something that kind of has that warmth and kind of big sound of an upright, this really does the trick. I play in a kids band, and I carried an upright bass around me for years doing that, and now I take this thing, and it's just a bigger sound, and I mean the kids get a kick out of it.
I think at the beginning people really weren't sure what to make of it, but I've interviewed Bagiti Kumalo a couple times and Abe Laboriel and some less likely people that would play a bass like this, like Billy Sheehan, yeah. and Hutch from Bonnie Raitt's band and from Jimmy Buffett, Jim Mayer, and it really is an incredible thing. It's little. And it's not a toy. This is for real. This it sounds incredible, and it's got more and more endorsements from high-profile bass players and even not so high-profile bass players. Everybody that plays it seems to fall in love with it, and I guess you're included in that group.
It's a great instrument. I do use it when I need some upright type of thing, and I don't want to bring out an upright. And the other thing, the amplifiers I use Aguilar amplifiers. I play a 751B with a 410 and a 115.
How about the future, Philip? You've done so much already. What else is on that list of dragons that you've yet to slay, or things that you'd like to do that you haven't accomplished yet, musically speaking?
That narrows the list. That's always, for me, that's always a tough question, because I look at every opportunity to kind of create music and I want to continue playing music in some capacity until they dig the hole and put me in the ground. Are there certain gigs that I want to get? I wouldn't necessarily say that I have gigs that I have to have. I think that all gigs can be great. I mean, as long as you're playing your instrument and maybe earning an income from doing it, that'd be the most important thing to me. I mean, to have a high-profile gig is great, but to also have a gig that brings me satisfaction as a musician is equally important.
Okay. Last question, Philip. What would you be if you were not a bass player? And this time, I do mean something outside of music.
So, this is a conversation that like my wife and I will have, because she wants to get out of California. It's like, well, you could just do this, you could do that. Would I want to be an artist? That'd be fun. I don't know that I think you have to die to make money, so that's not a good one.
Might be good for her, but,
yeah,
but that's between you two.
Yeah, we'll have to work that out later. I'd like to do something, I guess, in the creative sense, maybe some kind of creative business thing, maybe helping people, I guess. How about that?
That's a great answer. Very inspirational and uplifting. Thank you, Philip Bynoe, on location at Los Angeles College of Music, Pasadena, California, with the one and only Philip Bynoe. I'm John Liebman. You're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com.